For more, let's bring in former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. Prime Minister, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it very much. There's new reporting this morning, sir, that the CIA was tracking the Ayatollah's position for months. The president just told me this morning that the U.S. knows how many targets are left to be hit. What is that number? Do you have any idea? And who's in charge right now?
Well, we've got plenty of targets to weaken the regime, the IRGC, the Basij, the Mukhabarat, all of the terror apparatus that is terrorizing its own people. The first wave was to decapitate, to take out the leadership, but now we can focus on, after taking care of the air defenses, we can focus on peeling one layer after another of the whole secret police system in order to allow the Iranian people to make their decision of hopefully removing this horrible leadership.
How big is that system? How many are we looking at here?
Well, it's a huge system, but you don't have to kill every one of them. When you hit the main centers of command and operation and coordination, you can weaken it. Imagine that the Iranian people have chains of oppression on them. We're weakening those chains, but ultimately it's up to the Iranian people to rise up and tear those chains and fight for their own freedom.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, this is not over yet, not even close. You have Iran still striking Israel. But how much planning went into sort of the day after scenario for after someone like the Ayatollah were to be killed? Secretary of State Marco Rubio was asked about this kind of scenario last month. Here's what he said.
So I don't think anyone can give you a simple answer as to what happens next in Iran if the supreme leader and the regime were to fall, other than the hope that there would be some ability to have somebody within their systems that you could work towards a similar transition.
Has Israel or the U.S. had conversations with figures who might be able to lead Iran after this? And would Israel support opposition leaders in Iran?
Well, first of all, I want to emphasize Israel's goal in this attack was to remove the nuclear and ballistic missile threat. Israel's precise goal was not regime change. This is something that we are providing the Iranian people as an opportunity for them. But our goal is to defend ourselves and to remove the horrible nightmare that was, on top of us for such a long time. And had we not acted now, Iran would have had tens of thousands of ballistic missiles, including intercontinental ballistic missiles and nuclear arms that could hit Israel, Europe, and the United States. So first and foremost, that was our goal. In terms of the options, there's many potential options, from a small, or I would say a moderate change in leadership that would agree to denuclearize their own country, to a much more radical change in democracy in Iran. Ultimately, that's up to the Iranian people. We cannot define their future.
President Trump also has called on the Iranian people to rise up and take control of their own destiny. But the IRGC killed 30,000 civilians. You know, they are unarmed. The regime controls the economy, jobs, the food supply, everything in that country. Realistically, how long could it be until the Iranian people can seize control of their destiny?
Well, the IRGC today is not the IRGC from a month ago. It's much weaker. Its commander has been taken out. Much of its command has been eliminated, and we've just started. We're going to continue weakening the seams of this apparatus. However, whenever you talk about public action of uprise, etc., no one can really know, because it could take days, it could take months, and it could not happen. Remember the former Soviet Union in the 80s, no one knew when it would collapse. And this is a very similar regime in terms of corruption, rot, disconnection from the people, and just sheer evil. So we can do the job around there. There are a bunch of scenarios that can take over, and hopefully one of them will materialize.
The president warned the regime not to follow through on its threats to attack U.S. bases. Of course, air defenses also in Israel seem to be largely holding, but you do have drones hitting places like airports and hotels in UAE, Bahrain, Jordan, Kuwait. How long will it be for those kinds of places to open? And moreover, is there any likelihood that those states join in this effort now that they have also been attacked?
Well, first of all, I think the big lesson is do not mess with President Trump. I think President Trump has shown tremendous resolve and courage, and his words matter. And when people take his words lightly, they pay an immense price. And I think very few people imagined that President Trump would lead this sort of thing. And I think the whole region afterwards will be thankful, and the world will be thankful, because already now the world is a safer place compared to yesterday. And that's because we acted now. The various countries, moderate countries that have been hit, including UAE, Bahrain, Saudis, even Cyprus now has been hit. It's their decision to make. They thought that they could stay neutral and perhaps Iran wouldn't want to hit them. That's not the case. Hopefully they understand that we're facing a horrible menace and they hit back. One way or another, the United States and Israel are going to continue this pursuit of denuclearizing Iran, and hopefully weakening the leadership so much that the people of Iran will take over.
Former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, thank you very much for joining the Sunday briefing, sir.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.